Welcome to the Body First Healing Podcast. I'm Britt Piper, survivor turned somatic experiencing practitioner and author. If you feel stuck in old patterns, overwhelmed by your emotions, or disconnected from yourself, you're in the right place. Each week, I'll share practical somatic tools, personal stories, and conversations to support you in building a more regulated and embodied life. Because you can't talk your way through healing, you have to feel your way through. Together, we'll explore what it means to come back to yourself and create a life that feels safe enough to fully live in. I am so glad that you're here. Hello, my dear friend, and welcome back to another week here in the Body First Healing Podcast. Today's conversation is a rich, deeply healing, and also fun conversation. I've been looking forward to this dialogue with Sah D'Simone. So let me just give you a quick introduction and preview of what you can expect from the conversation today. Sah is a spiritual teacher and the creator of Somatic Activated Healing, a body-based practice that blends Buddhist philosophy, embodiment, and restorative justice. His work helps people feel without story, unburden the past held in the body, and reconnect with meaning, service, and joy. It is a rich, deep conversation where we explore seasons of healing, what a full body yes and no feel like, navigating the path of grief, and what real repair looks like. This was truly one of my favorite conversations to date, so I truly hope you guys love this episode as much as I loved recording it. Let's dive in. I have been looking forward to this. I have loved your work. I just think that you have such a light about you, so I'm really looking forward to it. Can you maybe share just a little bit about just how you show up in this space, in the healing space?
I mean, look, I was just on the phone with one of my students just before we got on, reminding her to share with the seasons, to serve with the seasons, to whatever season of life you're in, to let that lead you, let that guide you. The season that I'm in life right now, personally, outside of like the work commitments that I already have, like the somatic dance teacher training, the Temple of the Wild Saints, like these bodies of work that are already happening, the pilgrimages happening next year. My personal calling right now is tending to the land and tending to the animals. A couple of weeks ago, I was in my membership doing a talk and helping people understand a yes from a no somatically. So we just kept saying yes, yes, and just like really feel what is a yes, and then say a yes to the point that you can like perk up, that your spine gets upright, your shoulder rolls back, and your chin is not parallel to the ground, but your chin is like up, and you're looking up at the sky, and you started to like feel like a superhero. And I was training them into a yes and training them into a no. And no, 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 to the point that you like really collapse forward. No. So the embodied, the visceral, the body-based understanding of a no and a yes. And then after I trained them in that, I was like, let me read you guys these 15 ways of being of service. Obviously, it started with like the very traditional things that I know. Go to the hospital, sit with the sick and dying, make food for the homeless. Go to an orphan center, read them poetry. There's like a list, long list. And at the very end, I said, tend into the land, tend and caring for animals. And that was the only one out of the entire list that I perked up, that it was a somatic, a full body yes. Yeah. People don't know what a full body yes really is. You know, I think there's always like a lingering, if it's a full body yes, there's no residue. I think we need to understand that there's no psychological residue. It's like, it's done and it's clean. When a no is a done and clean, there is a need to name that. So the reason I'm saying all this is right now, I just moved in with my partner to a ranch outside of Los Angeles, and we are caring for a pig, a goat, 2 horses, turtles, 10 chickens, 5 ducks, and a huge garden and a massive orchard, way more than I can take on. But we are, this is the season that I'm in, you know? That's kind of in the background. And now the sort of front-facing work. My work is at the intersection of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, somatic dance, like embodiment dance work, and then restorative and social justice. That's kind of like the intersection. And my coming into all this work was very much like kinesthetically. It wasn't like through, let me read about this, let me study this, let me get a degree on it. It was like, I was 28 and then I left to India to learn how to meditate in India, and then in Nepal, and sat in silence for many, 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 many days. And then I met the dance, a sober, lucid dance, not the dance that I was used to at nighttime, drunk and high. It was a sober dance in Indonesia and Bali. So the stillness and concentration of the Buddhist meditation path, meeting the ecstatic dance path, I was like, oh my God, this is profound. And I just started to like weave that into my work. And then a friend of mine was like, what you're talking about is somatics, right? I was like, what do you mean somatics? Like, yeah, there's a whole field. And then one thing led to another. The next thing you know, I'm like on stage with Deepak Chopra teaching and bringing this, to thousands of people regularly. And through that body-based research, self-research, and then the student research, I was able to really craft a methodology called somatic activated healing, which essentially is a somatic dance practice that brings us back into our body, helps us feel without stories, helps us understand that the weight of the past is alive in our bodies unless we've done the embodiment somatic work to unburden the body from the weight of the past. So, and then with that, we enter into a state of trance. Then we can receive divination, oracular vision. We can see, the simplistic reductionistic language. We can see the future. We can pierce through the veil. We can understand ourselves. We can understand the past. We can understand the future free of fear, from this place where the Buddha speaks about of no self, no connection to a solid identity. So we do this very methodical body keys, which are these somatic breath to movement practices. And then we enter the trance dance. So that is what happens on the floor. And the foundation of the work is based on restorative justice, because I believe that in order for me to qualify and certify somebody as a healer, they need to really understand what forgiveness is and how society is so weaved into our psyche and our bones in a way that we don't know how to repair. We know how to punish, not restore. And then there'll just a couple more details so the listener can get a fuller vision of how I run my world is. And then my mom dies. And then I'm like, okay, I don't want anybody else to die the way my mom died. So then I go and I get a medical training at a hospital in Los Angeles to then sit with the sick and dying. Throughout this whole process, when doing all these different humanitarian efforts, from an orphan center in Indonesia to addiction recovery center in Nepal to homeless youth in Los Angeles, anti-slavery work in a small village in India. So this is kind of the full picture. It's like serve with the seasons, go where your heart's calling you. And sometimes your heart's calling you to you, take care of you. So I think I'll stop there.
I'm sure that someone can find themselves somewhere in that story. And I want to say one of the things I really appreciate that you just did, Sah, is that you started with the season that you're in rather than just starting with the work, because the personal work that we are doing, the personal seasons that we're in, and I feel like committing to the ever-changing seasons that we're in personally as practitioners is the work. I really love that. And you also did, maybe when you watch back the recording, when you were talking about your land and your animals, you did a little bit of a shimmy shake at the end. And I was like, he's living in this season right now. You're fully embodying it. And you can definitely tell that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like our paths are actually very similar. Do you still travel overseas and still do work overseas now?
Right in this very moment, no, but the itch is starting again. I'm like, and guess what? Just before I got on the call, there was a call that came in, Peggy Callahan, who runs one of the largest anti-slavery organizations in the world in India. And that's who I got to go learn and be of service with under her guidance and support. And she just called. I'm like, Maddie, what did the universe try to tell me? And then time to get on the field, because I are alive. And honestly, when I speak about somatics and body-based healing and understanding the mind-body connection, I only know what I know. And somehow it puts me in a similar place with all these clinicians. Somehow it's simply because I am curious enough and willing enough to put my body in these places and really stay there to the point that, like, viscerally, I feel terrified and then it passes, you know?
Yes. Yeah. No, I used to do a little bit of work overseas, and I would travel by myself, and I was a photojournalist for a while. And so I was working in rape crisis and trauma centers and worked with an orphanage in Uganda. I was in India for a while working with an organization fighting, forced child marriage. So I think our paths really cross in that way. And I haven't traveled for many years, but there's always that desire. And I'm curious if you felt this way. I remember every time I would come back home from being on assignment, I would feel like I was in I don't know if it was a time warp or just what it was, but at the time I was working at a steakhouse here in the United States. And so I'd go from working in these incredible places with people whose cultures, they were so embodied. They faced grief head on. They loved their elders. They danced. They were primal. They were beautiful. They were wonderful. Even just talking about it now, it kind of brings up some of that. And then I'd come home I felt like a culture that just felt so stagnant, and I'd have to go back to serving steaks and people who'd be like, this is a medium rare plus, not a medium rare. And I'm like, what world am I living in? But I also recognize in being a survivor of trauma myself that I think I was putting myself into those places where my body was, as you just said, I felt fear. And I was like, addicted, I think in some ways, to the chaos of the places that I was going. So, there was obviously a lot of nuance there. And I recognize, I'm trying to talk about the Course in Miracles. You're either a perpetrator, you're a savior, you're a victim. And I'm like, I'm trying to be a savior. And that's actually, I need to do a little bit of saving of myself. I hadn't really worked on myself. So I decided to stay home, but I'm wondering how I would show up now, like how I would show up differently with the somatic training and so much more personal healing. I mean, I'm almost 10 years removed now from doing that work, but I'm curious if it's been a while since you've been overseas, what are some of the ways that you feel like you might show up differently given things that you've been through in your life since then?
First, I want to name how beautiful it is that you've done this work. I love that so much. That makes me so happy that we're connecting. I'm just fascinated by courageous people who are thirsty for life in this way. So I want to name that. Thank you for doing that, and I feel a kinship with you because of that. And then to name this other piece, I think, look, the overseas work, I haven't been overseas since 2023 doing that work. The reality is my body collapsed all of last year dealing with enormous pelvic pain, to the point that this is a funny part, right? As someone in the somatic field who's training people, educating people, I'm on my way to Harvard this weekend to bring somatic in.
Oh, that's amazing. Hold on. We're going to pass by that. That is amazing. That's incredible. Incredible.
And even today, I got a text from a friend who was doing a trauma lecture talk at Oxford. And today he was like, hey, I think you should be at Oxford next year. Let me put you in contact with them. And, to sort of circle back, it's like knowing that my pelvic pain, excruciating pelvic pain to the point that I had to pee multiple times within an hour sometimes, had to get up multiple times a night to pee. At a very deep, subtle level, I knew that was grief that was unprocessed.
Yeah.
But no, I needed somebody to tell me there's something wrong with my body. So I got a colonoscopy, I got an MRI, I got a CT scan, and I got an ultrasound. I took meds. I literally did everything literally every single thing in the traditional route to only come back to my foundation. The body keeps the score. There's something unfelt. There's a scream unscreamed. There's tears that are uncried. There's a no that it's alive in my body that's screaming for support and tenderness and a pause, right? So the work overseas and coming back, the lesson that I have, or putting ourselves in these dangerous situations to learn and be of service, what I have learned is that I did it out of this fire to be of support and care for the sick and dying, and then all these other humanitarian things. There is a true, genuine intention, of being of support. And I also learned a huge lesson that the way that I was approaching a lot of this stuff wasn't the healthiest ways. Yeah, I think we should find our way to re-enter these spaces. And I feel the call to start helping here. I moved to a small town now to come back to the hospital and be of support to the sick and dying because it's such a tragic place. So many Americans die alone. So many Americans have no chromes and are in this traumatic stages of life, tragic stages of life, ending stages of life without support. So I feel called to doing that again. And my body's saying, nope, take care of Curly the pig. Take care of these plants right here in front of you first.
Yeah. So do you feel like you're at a bit of a crossroads of having to choose, or it's more so focus on self and what that season is and the next season will come?
Yeah. I keep wanting to text my rabbi that was my supervisor at the hospital, like, hey, can you make an introduction to me to this hospital here in this small town that I live in? And I pick up the phone many times and I just put it down. And like, I've reached out to Peggy a couple of times and go back to being with the kids who are formerly slaved in India. But there's always like something else. The life is like, nope, there's a redirection. The life's like, come back, pause here. Yeah.
Well, and how beautiful that you listen. I mean, how often do we override, or we don't yet have the capacity to listen, to know what the body is saying. One thing we can kind of lean into here for a second is if you're open to talking about it. You shared a little bit about your mom, and her passing, and I'm so sorry for that loss in your life. And it seems like it's something that you've been open about what that process of grief has looked like. And I'm curious, just first of all, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. The last few days, I'm starting to feel well. And, my tolerance for life is increasing. Tolerance for hardship, tolerance for intimacy, tolerance for the human body and the human mind and all of it. It's increasing. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. And the work that has taken you to, working with the sick and dying. I'm curious, how did you land there? How did, because that's some who maybe aren't in this space or who haven't been around that kind of suffering. It would be like, wow, that's really heavy.
Please. Yeah, thank you. And I want to name my mother's name, is Patricia. Yeah, sweet mother. Yeah. So the way it happened was I was doing a 30-day silent retreat in Nepal. My mom had been sick for 4 years at this point. And she went into the hospital for pneumonia. And we are in this 30-day silent retreat in the other side of the world, being really holy, like purifying our mind, getting into our bodies, doing all the freaking things with my language. And then, one thing leads to another. Fly across the world, 21 hours. My dad is like, hey, you should really come over. I don't think mom is doing so well. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you should come. Mom's not doing well. I think she would really like to see you. And then I'm trying to call and I can't talk to her because now she's in an induced coma. And I'm like, who approved this induced coma? How are you put on the spot to do that? It was just like this blur of things that happened so fast. And I arrive in Brazil, right? Flying across the world to Brazil. And I have an hour with my mom. And as soon as I arrived to see her body, her lips were chapped. There was like some eye boogers. Her head was cold. Her feet were cold. Her hands were so swollen. And I was just like furious that the nurses are not seeing that her feet are cold. Her hands are so swollen. Her lips are chapped. And it's like the basic humanity of a patient, right? They weren't tending to. And mind you, there's 3 nurses over there, chatting it up. There's not people over here in need of help. So that just enraged me tremendously to the point that I still have, my complex PTSD diagnosis has come from that night and those events that come a couple weeks before and a couple weeks following that night. So then we go upstairs. The nurse are like, I'm going to give your mom a shower. Okay. So, cause there's all these things that get her warm. I'm going to clean her up and give her a shower. We go upstairs. Literally 20 minutes after being upstairs, the nurse comes up and says, can you come down? Please, the doctor wants to talk to you. We come down. The doctor says, Patricia's dead. And literally turns around, washes his hand like he hasn't just delivered the news that somebody's mother has died. Not that she's broke an arm or whatever. She has freaking died. It's the very profanity of that statement was delivered with disgust, with no care, no compassion, nothing. It was like a complete dehumanizing way of delivering the most tragic news a son can ever receive. I know I'm very blessed because I was given a very wonderful mother. So that was a thing. Another was like, oh my God, this is horrific. This is traumatic. But then I have to accomplish these ritual because as in our Buddhist lineage, we have to say this long prayer. It's like 45 pages as soon as the person is pronounced dead. So I'm reciting this prayer and wailing at the same time, crying the monumental grief that's like I'm trembling. I can't stand up. So I'm leaning on the bed, holding my mom, repeating the prayers. Like the whole thing is complete chaos. And then the nurses have the audacity to start coming up and say, can you please tone it down? Can you please tone it down? Can you please tone it down? And they started speaking in Portuguese, not thinking that I'm from Brazil, that I speak the native language. And I could just hear the horrific, awful, disgusting comments that they were saying. And I'm like, and I couldn't engage. What I wanted to say is, F you, go to hell. I hope you die. I wanted to like bring the wrathful energy onto them. But I was just like, oh my God, I need to tend to this once in a lifetime event. My mother was just pronounced dead. I need to make sure that her consciousness moves in the right direction in the afterlife, into the bardo. So I'm reading these prayers. So that whole thing was so wild. And then, so that doesn't end there. And then the coming weeks, the way people speak to me, people were so illiterate. They're full of these platitudes, full of these like comments that are so centered around them. Let me know whatever you need. Thank God she's in heaven now. The suffering is over. She's your angel now. You know, God knows the best thing to do. And all these like really like so wild comments, you know? And so all of that really got me thinking like, wow, because of how much I've worked, we've been able to create a sense of privilege where my mom was being treated at a good hospital with good doctors and she was still treated like shit. I can only imagine people who don't have any privilege. What is it like to die without having support and care and privilege? And then I was like, okay, I need to learn this stuff. I need to get into this work. So I was initially going to do the traditional master's program to get into becoming a medical chaplain. And then the director of Upaya, which is Roshi John Halifax program out of Santa Fe, said, just apply. See if your credibility and your work you've done the last many years could get you a spot in. By the grace of the mother, I was able to get into the program. And then I started working with sick and dying, and it was so insane. The urge I had to always gift something to people, giving. And I quoted my Rabbi Sarah Baruch, and I say my rabbi not as a practicing a Jew. I'm a practicing Buddhist, but I love religion. I love different faiths, and Rabbi Sarah Baruch is a tremendous exalted soul in my life. So I want to name her. That's why I call her my rabbi. So she was like, Sah, stop trying to give something to your patients. Be the gift. And I quoted her in my third book saying, be the cookie. Stop trying to bring a cookie. Be the cookie. So this is kind of like the sort of long answer to how I got into this work. It was just seeing how like my mother died around friends, family. There were so many people at the hospital. And she wasn't a popular person by our standards, but there's 200 people at her funeral. 200 people. This is the funeral of a celebrity, you would think, you know? The most mind-blowing thing to navigate the funeral with everybody coming to talk to me when I'm hovering my body, because it's so excruciating to be my body. So I'm hovering my body and people are giving me all these beautiful things about my mom. So this combination of all of this led me to this work. And then the work itself is profound, right? Because it's the patients that I was with. Some of them were terminal. Some of them were actively dying. Some of them were nonverbal. Some of them were with disorganized thinking, confused. I got to really see what it's like to be hospitalized. And I do have to be hospitalized at a really high-end hospital. They call this the hospital that I was at, this where celebrities go to die and where celebrities go to give birth in Los Angeles. And the biggest thing that I want to name is how many people are traversing these very difficult seasons of their lives alone. So like we have to speak about the loneliness epidemic and how profoundly lonely we are, you know?
First of all, I'm going to just pause and thank you for sharing. And I definitely followed those waves with you. And I can tell the work that you're doing is so grounded in what I call, I refer to it as righteous anger. I always say, people are like, how'd you get into the sexual violence prevention space? That's where I started my work. And I'm like, well, the righteous anger. When I think about the things that have been done to me, things that have been done to other people, and why are we not talking about this, and why are survivors not supported? And so I felt that same righteous anger, that healthy aggression, that life force just come up in you as you were talking about that experience and what you experienced, what your mother experienced. And I really think of that as like, I'm just holding that space for like post-traumatic growth. I like to say that post-traumatic growth is when the purpose becomes greater than the pain. And I'm not sure where your pain levels are and how do we actually know, right? But I did a lot of research on our modern day superheroes. People often say like, oh, there's people out there who are superheroes without capes. You are absolutely one of those people, by the way. You're absolutely one of those people. But when I think about superheroes, I'm like, how about Nobel Peace Prize winners? And so I'm weird. I'm a bit of a nerd. And I started doing research. And I realized like all of these people, Malala Yousafzai, Nelson Mandela, like Tarana Burke, all of these people who are revered as doing incredible work in this world and like making impact, they've also gone through some of the most atrocious, horrible experiences. And so I think sometimes that's like the sadness in our humanity, is that when we're not willing to be in the humanness, the suffering, the pain, the joy, the grief, the happiness, the anger, the fear, everything, we really miss out on what it means to be alive. I think we're always like, oh, being alive means being filled with joy and gratitude. And yes, that's so wonderful. But have you ever sat in like righteous anger and done something with it? Like how powerful that is, how profound that is. So I'm hearing just the arc of your story. And I'm just like, I don't know why I'm so emotional. I'm just so touched by it.
I feel emotional too.
One question I do have, because I feel like this could be helpful, because people ask me oftentimes, like, if I know someone who's gone through assault, like, I'm like, here are the things to not say, right? Kind of like you were talking about. There are people who were, I don't know if they were comforting you or trying to offer you support in the times of grief and loss. And what they were saying was not helpful. So I know how to support people who are supporting survivors, but I'm curious, like in those moments of grief, of loss, of what you're experiencing, what words do you think could have landed better rather than what those people were saying?
Look, the reality is, I don't know if there are actual words that are helpful. I think it's presence. I think it's the warmth of the body. I can't remember exactly. My ex-boyfriend's cousin sent me a beautiful poem, and Marianne Williamson sent me an email. So out of all the core of support, and I still have the most strange things when people comment on social media, when I say the how insane it is to have all these beautiful things happening in my life and all these sad things in my life, and I can't talk to my mom. People are like, you can talk to her. She's always listening. I'm like, like the need for people to feel comfortable. I think that's the hardest part, is people don't understand that to heal trauma and to be with a traumatized individual, simply someone who's wounded or in pain, it's to not center around you. What can you say that makes you comfortable? I think that's a huge problem. People are constantly wanting to not feel uncomfortable and to be human, you make peace with the discomfort. Across every major world religion, across every major faith tradition, the common denominator is that pain is inevitable.
Yeah.
Part of the gig. Every single religion, every single faith has their own vernacular, their own lexicon, but they all speak to the same thing, that pain is just part of the gig. So there's a lot of people in a psycho-spiritual somatic state wanting to pretend that to do human at an optimal peak, at a thriving world, is to be above immune to pain. And it leaves people really discombobulated, because they're seeing a highlight reel of people smiling and achieving and succeeding and getting and doing and running. And there are all this able body stuff, all this sharp cognition, all this there's all this like clear skin, thin body. Like there's all this stuff that's just So social media is such a flawed way of understanding humanity.
Yeah.
Because you're highlighting one season of someone's life. And the thing is, because that one season is how you quote have gotten the applause. So now you try to perpetuate summer throughout all seasons. And it's just not how it is. It's just not how it is. So I feel deeply, I just feel like a deep sadness for the fact that like so many people, like this, just the empathy for the fact that the people who are trauma survivors, unfortunately, will receive all these platitudes that are so self-centered on the person saying them to feel better instead of actually never say thoughts and prayers or I'm here for you, whatever you need. No, I was talking to this guy, Will Guidara, I believe. Oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. Forgive me. But he had the number one restaurant in the world for a season. It was in New York City. And he's a, very, very prolific, exalted soul that has created these massive restaurants. The way that he thinks about it, very spiritual. And he said to me, he's like, the way that people say, I'm here for you, whatever you need during a grief season, like what does that actually entail? And what he did, which is what I repeat to many people, is a call every day. He told his friend whose mother had just died. And now I'm feeling emotional just thinking about that too. He says, I called my friend every single day at 9 a.m. for 4 months. Now that is care.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm paraphrasing and it's been tabulizing me because it's been a few years since we've talked about this on my podcast. He said, it was maybe like 70% of the time my friend never answered. But imagine me, the person who's the griever, the survivor, to receive a call every day, knowing that somebody has made you part of me. So that is what it looks like. That is what it looks like. You know what it looks like? You have a friend that's going through treatment. You have a friend that's going through chemotherapy. You have a friend that's going through their depressive episode. You have a friend who just went through a sexual assault. Don't send her a fucking text message. Use my language. Show up through their door and say, can I take you to do horse therapy? I booked us a weekend in Ohio to do horse therapy. I booked us a weekend at this thing. Or if you don't have the money, then just bring some crayons and a piece of paper and say, let's just color on the floor or pay a pottery class. Or if you can't do any of that, then just show up. Be like, I've got nothing. I made some soup. Can I just sit with you? That is what's missing. People are so quick. There's always the next. There's always the need to move through this pain and get to the next. And we're forgetting the thread of sweetness. That's what makes life sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Presence. Yeah. You started with presence and you gave such a beautiful example of what that is. And what is it? The Albert Einstein rule, the 93% rule. He says that conversations are only 7% words, right? So you're totally right. It's less about what you say. And 93% of the conversation is how you show up with your body, with your presence. Oftentimes words can fall flat. And when people ask me, how do I support so-and-so who's going through a hard time? I just want to make it better. And my question is, what is better? What does that mean? What does better mean? Right? You want them to feel good? You want, what does that mean? Because it's actually through the pain and on the other side of the pain that they find the joy, the healing. And you're right. It's just, we live, again, coming back to the whole, we live in a time where people are so stagnant. They're so disconnected. They're so uncomfortable with their discomfort. So when other people have discomfort, they want to quickly wrap it up, right? How can I make this better? That saying, you can only meet people as deeply as you've met yourself.
And that applies.
Yeah. Well, maybe one or two more questions before you wrap it up.
I want to just bring one thing in real briefly, my love. Alua Arthur, she's one of the most visible death doulas in the world, prolific, profound women. She says we have to adapt and not adapt, but create a new view of what it means to be well, what it means to be happy, what it means to have vitality. I think that what we're seeing out on social media of what it means to be well, what it means to be happy, what it means to have vitality, it's very skewed towards a very straight, white, male, cisgender stereotype that doesn't apply to brown, black, queer, fat, disabled, trauma survivor experience, which is the experience of so many people. I just want to name that you must find your own definition of wellness. That doesn't mean you're happy every day. That means that you're open to all of life. And you've named this many times in our conversations. I want to lift that up, that it isn't so much about seeking the joy, the high, but it's just this openness to do human with all of it, the grief, inspiration, the despair, and the gratitude,
Yeah. I think it's such a beautiful circle back to you talking about people aren't willing to do repair work. Right. And so when I think about moments in my life where I have conflict with someone or, and you're willing to sit down in the hard and have that uncomfortable conversation, or you're willing to sit with someone in their discomfort, in their suffering, the amount of repair that can come from that, the bond, right? I saw yesterday in my group program, there were people who were talking during our Q&A call about a really heavy topic. And it was someone essentially stating like, I've never been able to open up about this before. And we stayed on that call for an extra 40 minutes just to offer space because now their camera's on and their microphone and I'm dealing with the same thing. This person's camera, I've faced the same thing. And so it's like, we often think that the hard stuff is, isolates us. We have to keep it in secrecy, but it's really, I feel like it's there to connect us even more, So I love that you mentioned that. So share a little bit more about the restorative justice. This is something that I hadn't known about until I actually started. I saw some random documentary. I love documentaries. I'm a documentary girl. I was watching this documentary on restorative justice, and my perpetrator from my assault, he's imprisoned. He was sentenced to 60 years. And I had a moment in my experience in the aftermath of my assault where I chose, like, I want to forgive this person. And it wasn't necessarily for him. It was more so for me. But I also learned a lot more about his upbringing and the deep, horrible trauma that he went through. And that doesn't excuse what he did, but, of course it explains. And I went down a pretty messy path in my recovery. I ended up in a jail cell. And that was kind of a holy crap moment where I'm like, I'm behind bars at the same time as my perpetrator. Again, we're talking victim, perpetrator, savior, right? And I'm like, I am no better than him. He's no better than me. We are two humans on this planet who have made choices and who have to live with those consequences. And so that was a turning point for me. Then I saw the documentary, right? Restorative justice. And I remember reaching out to my legal team and being like, I think I want to pursue this if it's something that he's open to. They said, we don't think he's open to that. We don't think he's open to that at all, actually. And so I've held back just as a bit of a safeguard, and I still have more healing I want to do around that, but it's something that I'm still very interested in. But I'm curious, and the restorative justice I'm talking about is like victim perpetrator, bringing two people together with the hopes that it will not just help the victim in their healing, but it will help the offender in their rehabilitation. So instead, I started doing like work with local prisons and building out like healing programs where you're getting down to the root of their trauma and not just showing them how to fill out a resume when they go back into the world. So that's kind of how I've started pursuing that. So curious what that's been like or your experience with that or how you got into it.
Yeah. Thank you for naming this. And Britt, you're such a tremendous person. I just want to lift that up. Like, wow, I'm like more and more enjoying every moment of our conversation and just your soul and your soul's journey and all the things you've done. Look, the way that it came up is I'm forgetting her name, but I interviewed her in my podcast years ago, 2020, maybe 5 years ago. And she said that she had the first restorative justice, the first sexual assault case in America that was that went through the restorative justice path. Headlines across it was like made national news and it was this like big ordeal. And so she brought this into my space. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Wow. So mind blowing. I've never heard of this before. So then when I started to develop the somatic dance teacher train, the somatic activated healing method, I was like, this is very important work for you to be able to be a healer. You need to understand context. You need to understand trauma and what it means to be a trauma-informed healer and all that stuff. And then I watched Wisdom of Trauma, Gabor Mate's documentary, and then I see Fritzi Hortzman, doing the circle, step inside the circle work and getting people to understand their trauma. And she's listing the ACE score, the adverse childhood experiences. And I was like, oh my God, whoa, wow. And then she becomes a part of the faculty of the training. And the first week of the training, people are like, when are we getting to the dance? And I'm like, no, we're going to watch we're going to watch her documentary. We're going to hear her talk about the prison system and what that's like. So I just want to quickly name the way I understand and the way I teach is punitive justice versus restorative justice. The punitive approach is a one size fits all. Someone does something wrong or bad, we see that as a need to be punished. The amount of trauma and pain you've caused, the amount of hurt you've caused is the amount of punishment you need to receive in order for you to restore your goodness, in order for you to be seen as a good human that could participate in society. So that's the punitive approach. One size fits all. Now, the restorative approach is a new one. It's a creative, it's a higher perspective. It's a perspective that understands like, oh, wow, my offender had this trauma history that's insane. And then you look at the trauma history that he went through, they went through, and then you look at their parents, and you're like, oh my God, this has been happening for God knows how many generations. So we need to understand that the most traumatized individuals in our society are the ones who are behind bars. And the trauma, the pain that they've caused, and this is restorative justice speaking right here. This is part of the understanding. We're forgetting that blame, and this is where the nuance comes in, where we need softness and an open eye and a relaxed nervous system. When we are seeing the one person who's caused this tremendous horrific thing, we're blaming one person for a lineage of trauma, for lifetimes of no's that were never said. So we all have in our lineage the abused and the abuser, and it's all cooked into us. And some peoples don't have the capacity, the training, the support to stop the pain from going forward. And that's where heart, takes over and they go down a rabbit hole. I was talking to, side note, but within this note too, I was talking to Gabor Mate, and he said, your mom died right on clock, right on schedule, 60 years old. And I was like, whoa, that's harsh to hear. He explained, like, your mother had an ACE score of 10. If you have an ACE score of 10, I'm sure your listeners know about this. If you have an ACE score of 10, your propensity for one of a few things, die by suicide, die by heart attack, become a drug addict, or become an offender. She didn't do any of that. She died, obviously, she died by cancer at a very young age. So your lifespan becomes shorter. So in short, to make the restorative justice, to drive a point here, it requires us seeing that everyone is not their actions. That behavior does not mean self. That behavior does not mean soul. That behavior and soul are two separate things that enmesh and weave together. Punitive approach sees actions as self. Restorative has paradox, can see that someone has horrific tendencies, and also there's benevolence in there. And that requires a higher, very exalted view to understand context. And you look at addiction, it's cyclical. You look at poverty, it's cyclical. You look at criminality, it's cyclical. It's all cyclical. No one has an original desire to go and hurt somebody else. You become those who hurt you, and you just perpetuate that. And it's just an ongoing trauma fest of just, perpetuating the harm. So I want to offer that. And in short, and the restorative justice approach is one where there's required conversations. And to be honest, a lot of people in the legal team will never try to approach it through that lens because it requires so much more work on their end.
Mm-hmm.
But what that looks like pragmatically is the person goes into rehab, the person is in therapy, the person is, there's like so many ways to restore. It's not a one size fits all. Again, it's a very collaborative process. And obviously the forgiveness piece comes in, and it's the building. It requires, I had a student of mine make a complaint, and the student that I was harsh in the training, that I was harsh and short. And I can be harsh and I can be short, but it's also part of the flavor that people come to study with me for. But I'm not taking it away, the fact that I can be harsh and sharp. And I spoke to another friend of mine who does trainings at the kind of caliber that I do, which we have a lot of people. A friend of mine said, "You should ignore the email. Give this person the refund and move on with your life." And I said, no. The week that this came in is the week that we're doing restorative justice training. In our training, It took me 6 hours that week to reflect on my actions, reflect on the impact, sit with it, draft an email, revise the email, revise the email, revise the email, revise the email, get counsel on one experience. So it requires us to step away from modernity a little bit, requires us to step away from the fast-paced capitalistic go. So yeah, it takes another way.
Depth. Yeah. It takes a bit more depth rather than just sticking into the shallow end and we've done it, let's move on. I love the way that you explain that. And again, we just keep coming back to this concept of humanity. I think that when we can look at another person, I saw a quote recently, squirrel brain just happened. I saw a quote recently where it was like, don't let the ugliness in someone else kill the beauty in you. You know, we dehumanize people. And in my sexual violence research, the prevention work that I focus on is just the history of dehumanization in our world and how we have always used dehumanization as a form of violence. When we can dehumanize someone else, I mean, I remember watching back the news stories about my perpetrator and them referring to him as a monster, right? And then I'm like, yeah, what he did probably felt monstrous, but he's also a human. And I think our inability to meet people in their humanness, in the ugly sides of them, in their behaviors that are not so great, will often reflect our inability to be with our humanness. And so, yeah, again, just recognizing like that we do take on all those different roles all the time of victim, perpetrator, savior, and that no one is better than anyone. So yeah, I love this conversation. I feel like we could talk for a whole other hour about it. But yeah, I would just love to bring this to just a sweet close. And there's a question that I always love asking people. So if you could go back, okay, and sit with your younger self in a moment of deep struggle, or even just a recent version of you, what would you say or do to help them feel safe and seen? And I think we kind of touched into this a little bit, but it might be different. Yeah, who knows?
Good question.
It's funny, Sah, because this is usually the one deep question at the end, but I feel like we've been in such a deep conversation already that we've already gone here.
I'm like spacey. I don't know. Like I have a moment when I was 16 that I was the first time that I was suicidal, that I was like in bed for 2 weeks, couldn't get out of bed. It was just so like depressed and hopeless. And what I would like to tell that little sweetie pie is that you're good. You're worth it. You deserve to live. There's seasons, and it's all gonna be okay. I think it's all gonna be okay. And I think this like resounding, like you're good. There's something good inside of you. It's one thing that I want to remind everybody of it.
I felt that deep, that guttural good that came up. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think if anyone can walk away with a word from our conversation today, it's probably seasons. This idea of seasons and what we go through and what we grow through. Well, so how can people connect with you? How can they work with you? How can they follow you? Would you be open to share?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Follow my social at Sah D'Simone. And then if you're interested in the somatic dance work, look up the Somatic Dance Institute. And look up my website for all the events and things that we have going on, sahdsimone.com. And that's where you find all the things. Thank you, Britt. This has been so lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad we made it happen.
Yeah, me too. I think one of the things I really appreciated about this conversation was I feel like a lot of the conversations I have in the somatic space are so much about the science and the body and the nervous system. And so I think sometimes we forget that there is a spiritual soul side to this work and how powerful that is, and to not leave that out of the equation. So thank you for just really mirroring that today and bringing that in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the podcast, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning into the Body First Healing podcast. If this episode resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with someone that you love. I'll see you back here next week, and until then, be gentle with yourself. You're doing the best you can with what you have, and that is more than enough. Just a quick note, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a qualified provider for personal support.